frankly, I'm a little thin-skinned still. You know, it's funny. When I started in this business 30 some years ago, I remember people saying, "Oh, you're going to have to get a thick skin." My wife, who was in Joanne, who was part of our team and worked in TV news, always teases me about my thin skin. So best I don't read the comments is my point here, right?
Right. Yes, that's probably a good point. I mean, for the most part, I find our followers ask really good questions. They're very engaged.
Yeah.
There's always going to be a few, but we have a great audience.
Do you know, many of you will know Frank Graves from Ecos Research. He's a pollster who comments publicly all the time, and a really interesting guy. And I had him on about a month and a half ago, and he emailed me and he said, "Look," he said, "I've been on, all kinds of, TV and podcasts and whatever." And he said the feedback, like the comments, are just, he said, they're crazy. I mean, we've all seen those threads, right? Where the conspiracy theorists and the crazies, really attack you. They swarm you. And he said, he said, I went and checked out the thread for, his interview. And he said it was really good. He said, I'm happy to come back anytime because, your audience is really smart. They ask smart questions. They're very polite. I mean, there are always going to be some comments, but for the most part, our audience is great. So thank you. We really
Well, and I
appreciate you.
just want to shout out to James Van Leeuwen, who just signed in. He's one of the members of our channel, and he's also part of our energy circles. So thanks, James. Thanks for coming.
James is an interesting dude. If you ever get a chance to chat with James in person or in a Zoom, pick his brain. He's been around the block a long time, lives in southwestern Alberta, and has been involved in clean energy and so on for a long, long time, and has many astute observations. So welcome, James. Good. I would say it was good to see you, but I can't see you.
Well, let's jump right into it. So this week has been full of back and forth between Evie and Smith. Um, what's your take on what's going on?
Well, it's Premier Dave Eby of British Columbia and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. I'm really getting angry about this because what's happened is they got into a spat because a couple of days ago, Smith was at a press conference and she called Eby un-Canadian and said he was parochial, said some really insulting things. I mean, he's a premier of one of the four big provinces in Canada, and same size as Alberta. You don't you don't treat your colleagues that disrespectfully.
Yeah.
And the what raised her ire is him saying that, look, I mean, we don't, where's the beef around this pipeline that Smith wants to build out to the West Coast, this huge million barrel a day pipeline. And his point was that there's no proponent. These things are supposed to be built by private companies with private capital. They have to have a proponent to bring it forward. And despite all of the talk, and remember a couple months ago, 6 weeks ago, Smith said, "We've been in discussions with pipeline companies, and we expect a proponent to step forward any time now, maybe a couple of weeks from now." Of course, that never happened, and I'm not even sure that given Smith's propensity for stretching the truth. I'm not even sure those conversations happened, to be honest. But nevertheless, no one came forward. And so Smith last week said, okay, well, Alberta's going to be the proponent, and we're going to have three pipeline companies as technical advisors. We've got some indigenous groups who she declined to name. So I'm skeptical that's one of those to be named later, when we find them and they sign
Yeah.
off.
She sent a few emails out. She's just waiting to hear back.
Yeah. It's kind of like that. So anyway, EB. Now you have to understand, for those who are maybe not not from Canada, you have to understand, it's like Texas and California being sharing a border. As if they. I
Yeah.
mean, Alberta is the home of the epicenter of Canada's oil and gas industry, and very much like Texas. In fact, it started out with all American companies, companies, And the eventually, some of those were became Canadianized and new ones sprang up. But my point here is that there are very strong ties between Calgary and Houston,
Mm.
right? I mean, that's no secret to anybody in Canada. BC, on the other hand, on the West Coast, is very much kind of like California. It's got an environmental ethos, and it's strong on climate policy. It regularly elects New Democrats, which again for our non-Canadian audience is kind of the left of center party in Canadian politics. In fact, there's an NDP government, has been in government since 2017. So anyway, Evie was doing exactly what I had predicted. What everybody, it's not
Yeah.
like I have some insight here. I mean, when we've had a pipeline, the debate before, right? Trans Mountain expansion pipeline, but it was approved around 2019. So from about 2013, 2014 to 2019, massive rallies against it, and indigenous groups set up camps on the route, and I mean it's just
Yeah.
court cases, legal challenges, on and on. It was a big, big deal, and it featured a scrap between the NDP government in BC
BC.
from 2017 on, and the one and only NDP government there ever was in Alberta under Rachel Notley, and they were at each other's hammers and tongs. So there was absolutely zero chance. There would be negative chance that this wasn't going to erupt into a battle between the NDP government and the Conservative government in Alberta. And sure enough, EB was saying, look, there's no proponent here for this pipeline. Just the Alberta government saying that it will be a proponent. Well, come on, And so I'm not going to get all upset and respond to, speculate about a project that there's no beef there. There's just
Yeah.
none. Then Smith responded, and then EB responded to Smith, and then Smith the next day was anyway. It's a mess. But EB was, I think, his language and his approach was consistent with the way we expect premiers and politicians generally to communicate.
Yep.
He didn't call her names. He didn't disparage her the way she did him. But here's the thing that gets me. We know how Donald Trump operates. We know how that sort of mega culture operates. They throw out the bait, and then the trolls swarm, right? And you beat them up, and you beat up the person the target. And that's exactly what happened here. But it's
Yeah.
not just trolls. It was people who are very well known. I mean, basically, Danielle Smith's chief of staff he's actually the executive director of the premier's office. Rob Anderson, who used to be a member of who is a lawyer for crying out loud, and he was on, saying nasty things about EB on X on Twitter. So were other people who are directly connected to the government and those who support kind of oil and gas industry proxies like think tank members and that sort of thing. Really, really nasty stuff.
Yeah.
And that is not the way we're supposed to conduct public conversations in Canada. It's just not. And it's unbecoming of a premier, and it's unbecoming of the people around the premier to be behaving like that. And one thing I said, I made a point of this in a video I made today, is that the the way to handle this was for Smith to just take the soft approach, go out and talk to people in BC and meet with the premier and go on the radio and talk shows in BC. And if at the end of the day you can't come to an agreement and BC is still opposed, then as we all know, the federal government of Canada, has the constitutional authority, exclusive authority over the approval and regulation of interprovincial pipelines.
Well,
So,
and CBC posted a headline yesterday. There is no BC coast. It's a Canada's coast. Saskatchewan Premier supports Alberta's pipeline proposal. So you've got Saskatchewan lining right up behind Alberta on that one. Um,
well,
and
that's great. You know what? Alberta can then fly all of its bitumen from its border all the way to the coast. It's the pipeline from border to the coast that's the problem. Because, there have been a couple of really big spills, like in Kalamazoo, Michigan in 2010. It cost $1.5 billion to clean up. And that's in, 10, 15 years ago when money was real money, right? And sorry, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, David Stewart here in the comments is just saying, peak oil will happen before the pipeline is complete. Yes, Markham and I have talked about this. I also want to just welcome Mike Klein, who's also watching us on YouTube. So,
Mike,
hi,
good
Mike.
to see you.
I also
Thanks,
just want to
everybody. Good
read
to see you.
Danielle Smith posted this on her Facebook yesterday. She said, I believe the premiers and I believe the prime minister when they said they wanted us to work like a country, that they wanted us to open new markets, and that's what I'm going to do in goodwill. So let's work together to build our country and unlock billions in wealth and prosperity for generations to come. And obviously here she's referring to her pipeline project.
See, this is Danielle Smith's approach. I'm going to operate in goodwill, and we're all going to be buddies. We're all on Team Canada, right? We're all teammates. By the way,
Hmm.
you're un-Canadian, Dave Eby, and you're parochial, and the hypocrisy here is just galling. It really is. And this is the way Smith operates all the time. She does it in provincial politics. She
Hmm.
does it on national issues, particularly around energy issues. And this is not the way to. This really truly is not the way to run a country. You know,
Yeah.
there are her. But I want to get to this business of the benefits that she claims would accrue to Canada if there was a pipeline. Okay, so she was in Financial Post, National Post. She had an op-ed that
Yeah,
ran
she had an
Monday.
op-ed. Hmm.
Yeah, and she made a whole pile of claims, and I'm going to get to it. I've just been so busy, but I'm going to sort of fact check and debunk a lot of her stuff because she'll say something like, "If that pipeline had been in place, we would have had $50 billion more, effect on the economy or taxes or whatever it is." And okay, where's that from? Have you got a
How?
citation?
How?
Did somebody
How?
do some modeling? Where? I mean, if you don't cite it, if you don't attribute it in your piece, did you just make it up? Because I wouldn't be surprised if that was in fact the case. Because here's the thing, folks. What happens between now and 2030 is almost irrelevant because we know that oil is not going to peak until at the earliest 2029, 2030. So there might very well be strong demand for LNG and natural gas and oil up to the time that it peaks. That only makes that only makes sense. It's
Yeah.
what happens after the peak that is concerning because if you build that pipeline, by the time it's approved, by the time it's constructed, it will be 2030, and that's if you get started right away, right? And so it's entirely possible that the pipeline will be built right as oil demand peaks and then begins to decline. And then it becomes a stranded asset. Who cleans it up? That just opens up a whole kettle of fish. But Smith has done something in that op-ed that the proponents of pipelines and expansion of the oil and gas industry do all the time, is they assume that the energy future will look exactly like the energy past. That's exactly what they assume. If you only just give us a pipeline, we'll expand the oil sands, and oh my God, we'll just be rolling in money. Oh, what happens if things change? What happens if, China electrifies and it's no MC, have we not done shows before and videos where we went and found summaries of Chinese energy demand modeling, which
Yes.
show Sinopec, which is the big state-owned refiner, says that oil demand in China will fall from 17.4 million barrels a day today to 7.5 million barrels a day by 2050. So that's a decline of 10 million barrels a day. CNCP, the state-owned oil company, says it'll be 6.5 million barrels a day. Peking University says it'll be 5.5 million
Yeah.
barrels a day.
Hmm.
So how is Alberta going to build a pipeline to go to Asia and in the biggest market there, and really the only significant market for Alberta ultra heavy sour crude would be China. But
Hmm.
the Chinese themselves are forecasting a big decline in their demand. And then on top of that, because this is the silliest, people who should know better say, well, there's still going to be 7.5 million barrels of demand. Yes. And do you know who serves that market now? Saudi Arabia, Iraq, places like Venezuela, Brazil.
Yeah.
It costs the Saudis $2 on one of those big oil tankers to get a barrel over to China. It
Yeah.
costs us 18. So how are we going to take market share in a declining market from folks who are already entrenched, have lower production costs, and transportation costs are a fraction of ours? I'm sorry, nobody answers that question. Nobody asks because the narrative, this whole thing is not driven by economics, or a business case. It's driven by narrative.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
just talk, 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 and everybody talks this, repeats the same talking points, will convince people that in fact this is reality. And I dispute that. The evidence that we see have uncovered here and reported on at Energy Media suggests that there will not be enough demand to support that pipeline or an expansion in the oil sands. Why aren't we
Yeah.
talking about that? Anyway,
Well, I mean, there was a bit of a, I don't know if I would call it a Twitter war, but definitely a back and forth between Evie and Smith this week. And one of the things that Evie did write was they already have billions worth of private sector and First Nations projects that are going to create thousands of jobs. So he's definitely pushing back that, you know, that this pipeline might be you know, the only thing that we can do to create jobs. I mean, her op-ed was in the Financial Post and it said, you can't build Canada without a pipeline. She's really gone in hard on this kind of national Canada approach, which to me is, kind of shifting gears or pivoting away of her Alberta first. Alberta's always being ripped off by the rest of Canada. Now she's all in on the
sure, when it
Canadian move.
suits her.
Yeah. Okay, we've got Earl Road here. He says, I'm in BC. Premier Smith has always, in my observation, needing cash to fix huge issues that still hang around. Cash to her, but from her is the OPM model. She's never explained who the buyers are. So
Yeah, exactly.
that's a good point.
And here's a point. And I just did a video. I did an interview with energy economist Chris Bataille today. And there's another three or four that'll be coming, and it's based on a paper that he and a couple of other economists wrote. And the whole point is electrostate or petrostate, which is Canada's future? Which one are we going to choose?
Yeah,
And this is a complete and utter departure from the energy past, because what's happened is China has taken a lot of the technology was developed in the United States, which is deliciously ironic, right? But they took it, perfected it, and scaled up the manufacture to drive down costs. So now what China is doing, it's deploying that technology, the wind turbines, the solar panels, the high voltage DC lines, the EVs, the batteries, the heat pumps, the yada, all of that stuff and way more. China has scaled it up in manufacturing, driven down costs, and now is pushing it in a huge way out into the global south, particularly Asia, where we're trying to thinking about selling oil, right? So the whole point here is that China is the world's first electrostate. Its model is being copied by many, many other global south countries with the assistance of China. China is providing cheap solar panels, cheap
right.
batteries, and helping with financing. It's a very important point, and helping to finance infrastructure like power grids and ports and what have you. So the modeling that says, oh yeah, don't worry about it, there'll be lots of oil demand, is all predicated on the global south remaining to be oil and gas consumers.
Right.
And
And we know.
if you And you can see that that assumption is already being proven false.
Yeah.
And so I will say this again. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. 2, 3 weeks ago, we emailed Minister Hodgins, that's the federal minister of energy. We emailed his office and said, what modeling scenarios underpin your minister's very bullish comments about the future of oil and gas demand? And they answered. The media people sent and they said, look, it is primarily the International Energy Agency's STEPS scenario. That's the steady as she goes, status quo, not much changes between now and 2050. Not the APS scenario, which is the middle scenario and shows a big decline. It's STEPS. On top of that, it's OPEC, it's ExxonMobil, it's BP, it's Shell, the three big super major.
Yeah.
It's the U.S. Energy Information Administration, notoriously conservative in its modeling and its forecasts and so on. So every modeler and modeling study that informs Tim Hodgson's view, and we can say that's basically Mark Carney's view, is uber optimistic about oil and gas demand.
Right.
They, Here at Energy Media, we spend a lot of time comparing the assumptions behind modeling exercises to the real data, the data in the real world. And in my opinion, at this point, those optimistic modeling exercises, their assumptions are falling apart so rapidly, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Because solar is spreading rapidly, EVs are spreading rapidly, battery storage, on and on and on. So the assumptions behind the models that Tim Hodgson and Mark Carney rely upon are falling apart. They can't be trusted. And this is only 2025,
Yeah.
right?
So, well, I want to point out here, you know, Stephen in the comments is saying, we've had a good run with oil and gas. It's time to skate where the puck is going, quoting Wayne Gretzky there. And Earl just
Walter
wanted,
Gretzky, I have to jump in and say it was
oh,
Wayne's
it's
dad,
Walter.
Wayne's dad, Walter, who said that, not Wayne.
I had no idea. I thought that quote was always attributed to Wayne
I know, incorrectly.
incorrectly. And Earl is just clearing up. OPM is other people's money. I was like, I don't know this acronym. So thank you for clearing that up. Um, I think one of the things that was in the press release, and again, Danielle Smith repeated it in her op-ed, is that she's heard from Asia. She knows that Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, Indonesia, they've heard from Europe. Everybody wants Canadian oil.
Okay, let me respond to that.
Yeah, let
First
me
of all,
hear.
Japan and Korea are minor markets for ultra heavy sour crude. Korea processes about 350,000 barrels a day of it, and they are the garbage collectors of Asia, right? They want the absolute lowest quality, lowest price product they can get, the garbage. So they are not going to be, big customers of Canada.
Hmm.
And some of those other ones, Malaysia. And I actually, because there was an article in, if I'm not mistaken, Foreign Affairs magazine out of the US. So, and they used Malaysia as an example. So you have to understand that countries that are electrifying, currently are spending a lot of money on oil and gas imports. And the one I know best is China. So last year, China imported $325 billion of oil and $50 billion of LNG. Okay. That's a huge incentive to electrify your transportation sector and your
Right.
heating and cooling sector so that you
Hmm.
don't spend money on those imports. You generate the energy yourself and you build the technology that does the work. And Malaysia has an explicit policy that says we are electrifying to end oil and gas imports. That's a national government strategy policy objective. Now, there are another 4 or 5 Asian countries that have explicit policies, just like Malaysia. And then there are a number, including China, that have implicit policies, which means that basically they have electrification policies, and you can see from the consequences of those policies that it would displace oil and gas imports.
Right.
So it's an implicit versus explicit. But once you understand what's going on in Asia and how many of those countries are copying the China model with the assistance of China, anybody who says with confidence, oh, yeah, no worry about it, there's going to be lots of oil demand in China is full of shit. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, folks, but this gets really frustrated. I mean, I'm talking to people in the industry who don't read data and who wouldn't know a modeling exercise if it bit them on the ass. That's
Yeah.
really frustrating. And yet, these are the people that are going to be making decisions with our tax dollars, who are going to be advancing projects that will sow political dissension between, like BC and Alberta. And
Yeah.
they haven't even they haven't made the business case. And you can tell by the comments they're making, they have not done the homework to make the claims that they are making.
Yeah.
And it's really frustrating because they come out in droves, right? It's just like a swarm of drones, a swarm of trolls, a swarm of proxies, and and you know what? Here's an interesting thing. Do you know that they never come after me?
Yeah. Why
They,
is
they
that?
never come after me. And you know why? Because I'm one of the few guys that can fire back.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. I've done the work, right? I've read the
Hmm.
studies, interviewed the experts, read the data, that kind of stuff. And they go pick on Dave Eby,
Yeah.
who's premier. It's not his job to do that kind of stuff. It's my job.
Yeah.
And we have a big audience. We have a very big audience in Alberta and to a lesser extent in British Columbia, which is great. But a lot of the political agenda gets set by, the National Post and the Post Media, right at the tip of my tongue. Post Media, the TV networks, the radio, and so on, where I just I don't get a lot of exposure. So, and there's nobody else. Like we had a
Yeah.
conversation with a high level billionaire out of Montreal not that long ago, and he said, Markham, nobody else is making these arguments in any form of media.
Yeah.
And it boggles the mind that we're talking about the future of Canada's not just our energy system, but manufacturing and the infrastructure that we build and so on. And we're so ill-informed, so ill-informed.
Well, one thing that we've talked about this issue a bit last week and again now, and one of the things we've talked about is that one of the companies that have stepped up to be part of this application to the Major Projects Office is basically a crown corporation. However, in her op-ed, she clearly says, and I'm quoting, to be clear, our intent is not another publicly funded pipeline, but we are getting one ready for private sector to take the reins in collaboration with the energy sector, pipeline companies, and Indigenous communities. So she's directly pushing back on, you know, that idea that it would be federally funded.
Oh, sure. And I suppose, that maybe it would be federally funded. Maybe it would be the Alberta pension that she repatriates from the
Right.
Canada Pension Fund, and maybe that would go into an Alberta federal Crown Corporation, or maybe it would be the Alberta Indigenous Corporation funded by Alberta taxpayers and that allows Indigenous communities to invest, or maybe it would be the federal Indigenous corporation, which does exactly the same thing. There
Right.
are lots of ways to get public money into these kinds of projects rather than bringing out the big red checkbook or the little blue checkbook from Alberta. So, maybe it's a hybrid model. Maybe it's not a crown corporation, but maybe Alberta invests in it to de-risk it, right?
Right. We've
This
talked
is the
about that
big
before
thing.
too.
We have it happens all the time that projects come and the private sector is not quite there. They're not convinced that the technology or the project is going to be profitable. And so they need to put, or they demand that the public sector step in and de-risk it. So instead of if it costs $10 billion, the Public sector puts in 1 billion. Now it's safe enough for, for the private capital to, and that's not a horrible thing done right. It's a horrible thing when you do it this way. And so when Danielle Smith says that there's not going to be any public money, I I call BS on that. I would almost guarantee you that there will be public money of, and look, even here, in order to fill up that pipeline, the oil sands has to expand production, right?
Right.
And it's going to require, because Smith herself proposed the grand bargain, a pipeline for emissions reductions out of the oil sands. The only emissions reduction being put on the table is carbon capture and storage. Already, the Pathways project, which is only 12% of all of oil sands' existing emissions, has received $8 billion of federal subsidy and $2 billion of provincial subsidy. So going forward, if there's going to be
Yep.
a decarbonization of the oil sands, the industry has said publicly, it hasn't said it for a while, for a very good reason, but it said many times in the past, like 2, 3, 4 years ago, it's going to cost $75 billion to decarbonize the oil sands. Government's going to have to pay 50 billion of that. So if
Wow.
you expand it even more, plus then inflation, right? Things always cost more than you think for mega projects. So what's it going to be? Is it going to be 75 billion? Is it going to be $100 billion the federal government has to put in? How many billions of dollars of the Alberta just on the decarbonization of the oil sands? And then what public monies will be put up for the pipeline? So this has got to be the potential for a money pit.
Yeah.
And so, yes, anyway, we're protecting our
We've
tax
got a good
dollars.
question here because we all did see, you know, this is a question from Earl. I'm just going to read it out. Did PM Carney dangle the Keystone Pipeline under Trump's nose in order to relieve tariffs on steel? And was there a response from Danielle Smith anywhere?
I haven't seen one, but then, I'll be honest, in the last couple of days, I've just been, nose down working on stories. So I really can't say, to be honest.
Okay. And then we've got Anthony's talking about, he's talking about building other things with oil. We also always talk about this, that, there is opportunities to make other things. So yes, of course, we couldn't agree more.
Can we talk about some of those? Can we talk about, because there's bitumen beyond combustion, which we talk about all the time. The
Right,
Alberta Innovates is a year or two away from having a commercial process to make industrial grade or automotive grade carbon fiber, and then they can make asphalt binder and graphite. Those are the three processes that they've invested money in.
right.
Did you know that it doesn't have to be automotive grade carbon fiber? That there are plenty of other markets for products that you put carbon fiber into to strengthen it and lighten it that have nothing to do with automobiles.
Hmm.
Construction materials, for example. If you want to make some sort of
Like
composite
houses and stuff?
material,
Oh,
well, stuff that goes into houses or into buildings, building construction, and
hmm.
the chemist, chemical engineer that I talked to at Alberta Innovates gave me a list,
Hmm.
and I just can't remember what they are
Mm.
offhand. Then on top of that, the Chinese have already done it. It's called crude to chemical. So normally what you do is you take a crude oil, you refine it, and then you put it into a petrochemical plant. But with these big, massive complexes they have, they're very sophisticated, and they go straight from crude to chemical, and they like the kind of oil that Alberta makes. So there is going to be some demand there. Trans Mountain expansion will be able to supply some of that demand
Right,
from those complexes. Um, and then the Saudis are also working on some of this as well, and we'll build some refining or some petchem capacity along that way. Alberta has the second largest petrochemical complex in North America. And we have this wonderful source of cheap bitumen.
Right.
Why are we not talking about turning, directing some of that feedstock that's going to refineries in the US to building out the petrochemical complexes here in Edmonton and process it domestically?
Yeah.
Attract investment, create jobs, supply chain opportunities, all of that kind of stuff. So yes, I mean, who was the fellow who made the comment? Dave?
It's Anthony who's talking about
Oh,
it.
Anthony, I short memory. Anyway, Anthony is absolutely correct. And here's another thing that the Alberta Innovates engineer told me. Paulo Bombin, Dr. Paulo Bombin, I've interviewed him many times. He said, this is only what we've had time and resources to investigate. He
Right.
said if they gave us more money so we could hire more scientists and scale up our R&D, he said we'd come up with all kinds of other applications where you could use bitumen for who knows what, right? You just need to do the work.
Right.
So there are so many alternatives to doing the same stupid old thing we've always done, which is dig it up, build a pipeline, ship it off raw to another so somebody else can refine it. Now we can do different things with it. We can be clever about it. We can make more money doing it, right? Because remember, Alberta Innovates study where they modeled it
Right.
out, and if you got 50 bucks for a barrel of raw bitumen that you sold to a refinery, if you turn it into carbon fiber, it now becomes $200.
Yeah.
You
Four
make more
times.
money doing it at home.
Yeah. Anthony is pointing out bitumen is not petrol and you know, so he's just yes, of course we know that. I also want to point out that James is also making this comment. We're not advocating for shutting down the oil sands. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about pivoting to something else. Um,
Yeah,
so and creating a manufacturing industry right here,
right.
right,
And here's the irony. Here's the irony. In the midst, right on the cusp of peak oil demand and decline, which we think is going to happen in the 2030s,
right,
the current industry and Alberta government are advocating for policies that would lead eventually to the decline of the oil sands industry. And you can go to the Canadian Energy Futures report that the Canadian Energy Regulator puts out, and you can see their modeling about, well, it's, if oil prices are here, then it's going to decline to this, and if they're a little lower, it'll decline to that. And so this is not, we know we have a good idea of what will happen. What we're advocating, which is building other industries that use, like materials industry, non-combustion uses for bitumen, would actually extend the life of the oil sands out past into the next century.
yeah, exactly.
We're not advocating to phase out, we're advocating to phase up. And here's the other thing. If you put the oil sands on a solid basis, and so they were making, solid money. They had a domestic market. It's not up and down, boom and bust like the oil market is. You could then say to them, okay, folks, you now have to clean up your tailings ponds. You now have to clean up the mess you've made up in northern Alberta, and you have to make that operation sustainable,
Yeah,
right? You've got to reclaim your pit lakes. You've got to all the crap up there that the $130 billion of it that is unfunded liabilities. You need to take care of that. If you don't do that, like if you don't uh, change the nature of the industry and it declines with the oil demand, who's going to pay for all of that?
yeah,
$130 billion of liabilities that the oil companies will walk away from. And if you want to see the model for that, look at the conventional side of the industry in Alberta with its,
yeah,
80,000 inactive wells, and it's got its own $130 billion problem. That's the future of the oil sands if you don't do
yeah.
something.
Well, and I just want to say welcome to Card Crazed Froggy. He's also one of our. He's always here. He always joins us live. He's saying preach at Markham, so he likes what you're saying there.
We're doing our best.
And David Stewart, j- just before you said it, said don't forget the money to clean up the oil well mess. So that's a whole other you know industry we've got going. So yeah, I think you know. I think what we're talking about here is pivoting to new opportunities, creating, something that Canadians can be proud of, coming out of Alberta. So we've been um, talking for about 40 minutes now, and I want to give you the last word, Markham.
Um, at some point, we're going to have a live event that talks about the suggestion I saw in the Canadian Dimension magazine that Canada should nationalize its oil companies. No, no, don't do that. This would be the worst time to nationalize. Could you imagine nationalizing, like Cenovus or Imperial Oil or, Suncor or whatever, and you no sooner buy the stupid company because you just can't, turn around and nationalize it. We're not the Soviet Union or, something. You have to pay for
Buy
it.
it. Yeah.
Uh, yeah. And so you buy it, and 2 years later, peak oil demand arrives and then it begins to decline. And you bought an asset at the peak of its value, and then it starts to decline. And then,
Yeah.
the taxpayers are out. So, no, do not take risk away from the private sector, for private investors. Let them bear the risk that if there's any to be had. Now, where the government could spend money, remember, Alberta Innovates, the Alberta government, basically owns the intellectual property for bitumen beyond combustion. It
Right.
owns the intellectual property. So you could have a crown corporation that could, build the industry that turns bitumen into carbon fiber precursor, right? That's the actual feedstock that the carbon fiber manufacturer takes and then turns into carbon fiber. And you've heard me tell this story many times, MC, that I interviewed Zoltec Manufacturing out of St. Louis
Hmm.
4 years ago, and they said, "Oh yeah, we know what's going on in Alberta. We follow it closely. And if you guys come up, you get that process perfected, we will build manufacturing facilities in Alberta because you put them right next to the source of the precursor.
Right.
That's
Right.
the way the economics of this industry work." He said, "Yeah, we'll do that." So
Yeah.
anyway, uh, put money into the new industry, create new supply chains. If you're going to put any public money in this, support the new stuff. Don't pay top dollar for the old stuff and then get stuck with stranded assets. And the environmental liabilities that go along with it. That would be the absolute worst thing you could do.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, we've got one other question here from Stephen. He's saying, what steps should we make to create the petrochemical supply chain?
there's already a petrochemical supply chain, right? I mean, that's now the one that's currently the petrochemical cluster we have uses natural gas and natural gas liquids because that was created under Peter Lougheed back
Right.
in
Right.
the 70s because he said he passed a regulation, implemented a regulation that said that before natural gas could be exported, it had the ethane, which is the main ingredient that those plants use. The ethane had to be stripped out and offered for sale in Alberta, and then that provided now a stable source of feedstock for petrochemical business. So there needs to be some changes, like there needs to be some green hydrogen or even blue hydrogen to replace the gray hydrogen that
Right.
is currently emitted. But and to be honest, we don't know the answer to this. We don't a detailed answer because I don't know that anybody's ever done the analysis, and I haven't interviewed an expert. So I'm kind of giving you a little bit of it that I'm familiar with, but so I don't have a full answer to your question. But some of the supply chain is already there that would be required to do crude to chemical processing.
Well, I want to remind folks if you're watching right now, please make sure that you're subscribing to our channel, following us on Facebook. We also, you can support us by buying a membership on our YouTube channel. Just hit the little join button right beside the icon. And make sure that you also keep the bell on when you subscribe to our channel so that when we go live, you'll get a notification right away. Markham and I are going to be doing another couple lives next week. So if you have questions or you want us to do a live about a certain topic, please email me and, I'll make sure I get some questions ready for Markham. And yeah, that's great. I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining us tonight, or I guess this afternoon. And
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for
yeah,
showing up, and we'll see you next week.
okay, take care, everyone.